On the story, we can bring in our chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons. Rob, there you can see in that report we played, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets across the country, defying calls from the junta to stay at home, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like this is going to be the biggest day of demonstrations yet, and not just people coming out into the streets, but a general strike, which appears to be effective, with people leaving their factories, leaving their businesses, closing down their shops, restaurants, cafes, everything, in response to the coup d'etat by the military authorities. We saw big demonstrations again over the weekend, and 2 people killed when the military opened fire on Sunday. That doesn't seem to have deterred people from coming out. On the contrary, it seems to be having exactly the opposite effect, as indeed does that warning, which we heard in that report just now, that the demonstrators could end up getting killed if they carry on down this path. A statement from the junta on state-run television, which led to them being knocked off Facebook, and also to international condemnation from the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres and others. So despite the efforts of the military to try to contain by threatening the protesters and by upping the odds all the time, by pouring troops as well as police into the major cities, across the length and breadth of Myanmar today, we're seeing huge demonstrations yet again.
Rob, speaking of that warning from the junta that they will crush these protests underway in Myanmar, will the international community let that happen, considering that the world is watching what's going on in Myanmar?
Yeah, it's difficult, I think, for the international community to do an awful lot. We have seen the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada impose sanctions on the generals. And it's expected today that the European Union foreign ministers will do exactly the same. But beyond coordinating condemnation across the world, including, of course, from the United Nations, it's very difficult for the international community to do much more than impose sanctions. It's not going to get involved militarily. Certainly it's going to impose pressure. But part of the problem is that the United Nations Security Council very rarely acts in harmony, although this time there has been a statement from the Security Council to which China and Russia, as well as the others, did sign on, calling for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi, the woman who should have been the leader of the newly elected government had it not been for her arrest by the military authorities and the coup d'etat. But in a sign that things could be changing, Indonesia, one of the big powerhouses of Southeast Asia, has called on the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, to start playing a more active role. ASEAN is the main regional power grouping. And if it were to get involved in a big way, it could make life extremely difficult for the Myanmar authorities. It could cripple the Myanmar economy. And the generals know that perfectly well. They are calling for some sort of dialogue with the generals, talking perhaps about some form of compromise over the promise by the generals for fresh elections, but elections which would be monitored closely by the international community. That's far less than what the protesters are calling for, but it is perhaps a sign that ASEAN may be getting much more deeply involved, and especially in back-channel negotiations. If that were to happen, there maybe is some small chance at last that a resolution to this problem could happen.
A lot of players in the region indeed watching what's going on in Myanmar. Thank you very much for that, Rob Parsons there.